Hey y'all, we're back. It's Megan, and this is the Yes God Cast, and this is a place where we come to integrate our personal will with our divine will and remember our true identity and how much power we have to select our reality. Today's episode is episode number 6, and we are going to be talking about the framework that I actually use with my clients to walk them through remembering their God self, their divine true identity, and how to actually practically navigate that in the world. And so the framework that I use is something called the ACE framework. And I have coined the frame that you use this to ace your life. And I may have mentioned this before, but A stands for awareness, C stands for clarity, and E stands for experience. So in this particular podcast, I'm going to be talking about the awareness. The next episode is going to be talking about the clarity. And then the following episode after that, we're going to be talking about the experience. So on this ACE framework, under this awareness pillar, layman's terms for awareness is what's really hood. Okay, what's really good? What is going on? This pillar requires us to be brutally honest with ourselves, to observe ourselves, to have a level of mindfulness, to approach our behaviors and our thinking and the narrative that's going through our mind with a level of accountability, and really become analysts, right? And really take a look at ourselves under a microscope to find out exactly what it is exactly who it is that we are being, rather. And based on the who it is that we are being, we can then very easily switch over and see the things that we have manifested as that particular identity. Because remember, manifestation is not about the things or the circumstances that we want. It's about the identity that we are embodying, that is therefore attracting to us the circumstances and manifestations. All right. So the first kind of step again is mindfulness. And that requires some self-observation. It requires us to look at exactly what our thoughts are through the day. And that can be a new practice for people because most of us have not been taught how to think or the power of thinking. We just had thoughts come in our mind and we went with it, and those thoughts make us feel a certain way. And then we just go from there, right? Now, if you're on this spiritual development, this personal development journey, you know the importance of actually examining our thoughts, examining exactly what is that little voice in our mind telling us. Because based on what that little voice in our mind is telling us, it is making us feel a certain way, which is causing our vibration, which is then acting as a magnet for the things that God is saying yes to. Yes, God. So being aware of the narrative, being aware of triggers. And when I say triggers, I know that a lot of people tend to think about interactions with other people. But the reality is, if you really pay attention to yourself, you will see that you likely get triggered throughout your day. And what I mean by that is when you have a certain thought about something and you make a certain conclusion about something in your mind, that can cause an anxious response in you. That can cause fear in you. That can cause a fight or flight response. And so being able to be aware of when those triggers come up, and so that we can identify the thought that caused the trigger, is extremely beneficial, because those are the thoughts that we really want to hone in and focus in on, because underneath them it usually reveals a belief system that we have, whether we adopted it from our upbringing, whether it has been shaped and molded through our experiences in life. Everyone has an underlying belief system about themselves and about life and about how things go. So being able to identify those triggers will help us to get under those layers to figure out, okay, what's really hood? Like, what is going on? Why am I feeling this way? Why am I thinking this way? And then we can answer the question, why are things happening and playing out in my life circumstances? Because you are the source, right? We are the source. As divine mind, as the God self within us, we are the source of all of our circumstances. Whether we understand that yet, whether we even believe that yet, that is the reality. And so it would benefit us to dig down and figure out how it all works. All right. And that's what the Yes God cast is for. Yes, God. So paying attention to the self-talk, to the inner dialogue, paying again attention to those triggers, also taking accountability, like I mentioned before. What parts of my perspective on this particular circumstance or situation could use a shift, right? And I can tell you right now, if our perspective is anything other than this is all working out for my good, this benefits me in the end, then we probably don't have a healthy perspective, right? And this is not to diminish or minimize anyone's experiences that they've had. It's just to say that what we think and what we expect is what we receive. So I know that that can be really challenging to wrap our minds around, right? Especially if we've had a certain circumstance that has been repetitive for us or something that has happened over and over and over again. But we have to understand, and I've talked about this in previous podcasts, is that patterns that happen over and over again, the root of it is our thinking. The root of it is our silent expectation. And this is why the mindfulness piece and the self-observation piece is so important. And then as far as another accountability question we can ask ourselves is, what personality trait of mine has a negative impact on my relationships and or opportunities, right? And again, this requires a level of brutal honesty and humility and willingness to look at ourselves in an objective way, willingness to put ourselves in other people's shoes and potentially see how we may be received, okay? Another question we can ask to gain more accountability is, what is a complaint that I have received from other people about my personality over and over and over again, right? And we don't want to shoot the messenger, right? Because sometimes the complaints or the feedback, constructive criticism we receive about ourselves can come from our loved ones, right? And come from our family, come from our partner, come from the people that are closest to us. And so whether we want to admit it or not, the people closest to us know us the best. And that's why those close relationships can be so triggering, because they're actually holding a mirror up to us. So being able to objectively say, what's a complaint that I've heard about myself a couple times that may be worth me actually taking a look and seeing if this is potentially something that I can have more flexibility in around my identity and my personality, okay? And then the current state, right? So really being able to make those correlations. And so if I were to ask you, hey, as my coaching client, hey, tell me what's going on right now, what's going on in your life. And my client proceeds to list out, hey, this is going on, I'm not happy here, I'm not fulfilled here, I'm anxious here, I'm stuck here, I'm not making the money I want to make, I don't feel like I found my life purpose, I don't feel like I have good relationships, whatever it is that their problems or issues are, we can then take note of that, right? But then also, again, objectively understand that that is a narrative, okay? That is a story. That is one perspective, okay? And because our perspective is a disempowered one, where we view ourselves as not enough, we view ourselves as not worthy, we view ourselves as not where we should be, or we have, we should ourselves to death, we can then say, okay, you know what? This is a story of my current state, and I am currently identifying as a victim of my circumstance, okay? So when we can objectively zoom out and identify our victim narrative, then we can go ahead and reverse engineer and find the victor narrative. How can I be victorious in this? Where is my hero's journey? Where can I move from my current state to the future state? Okay. What is my current self-concept of myself? Well, if someone comes to me and tells me that they're anxious, they're depressed, life is not going the way it should go, they're not making the money, they're just not feeling great about themselves, then we know that their current self-concept could use a tune-up, right? Because they're viewing themselves as not enough. Okay. And we know that as children of God, as descendants, as heirs to the throne, right, that we are already enough. We are already worthy. We are already whole, regardless of the circumstance, regardless of the money, regardless of the relationship, regardless of the state of health, right? All of those things need to be identified so that we can understand, okay, my concept of self is that I'm sick right now. Okay, even if you got a diagnosis from the doctors and it's real, it's a real thing, it still is a self-concept, right? Because we have accepted that diagnosis as a part of us. We have accepted our financial state as reflective of our success or our failure. We have accepted our relationships or what we're doing with our time, or whether we feel like we're fulfilling our life's purpose, right? We have accepted those things as if they mean something about who we are, okay? So those are the areas where we identify the self-concept, all right? And from that self-concept, right, then we can go deeper and say, okay, so what beliefs from this self-concept have led me to choose this, right? So what happened in my childhood that led me to believe I had to be a people pleaser? You know, what happened in my childhood that has now given me abandonment issues? And so now I feel compelled to over-explain or overextend or disrespect myself in certain situations. Okay. So being able to actually have this deep dive, right? This is all under the umbrella of awareness. And this really varies from person to person, depending on who you are. Sometimes becoming aware of yourself is a process that could take months. Sometimes I have a lot of clients actually who are therapists, who are nurses, who are doctors, lawyers, high performers. So they are typically already coming to me with a certain level of self-awareness. They are already very, very aware of themselves. They're very aware of their limiting beliefs. They're very aware of the trauma that shaped and molded them. They're very aware of their current self-concept. And so what we do is typically we do a little bit of work around separating their identity from the self-concept and understanding that our concept of ourselves is very malleable, okay? It changes. It actually changes on a day-to-day basis. That's why, you may be in a great mood, one day, and then the next day you're feeling like crap about yourself. And then the next day, you're like, life is not that bad. I'm actually not doing that bad. And so that self-concept fluctuates a lot. And with that fluctuation comes different results. Okay. So our work together is to look at what the current self-concept is. And regardless of what it is, right, we are moving towards the truth of being still and knowing that we are already God. We are already whole. We are already complete. We are already enough. Okay. And that health, happiness, love, success, prosperity, money, peace, bliss, satisfaction, fulfillment, all of those things are our birthright. We have a right, because we are an heir of God, we have a right to exist in that self-concept. And so the work then becomes, how do I move from my current self-concept over to the concept of the version of me, right? Because everyone's different. Your version of happiness, health, love, joy, peace, abundance, bliss, right, is different than someone else's concept of that, right? That's a different feeling that you may have versus someone else. So this is very kind of personalized work, and it's not always a one-size-fits-all solution. However, we get as close to it as we can by going through some exercises, and I'll be talking about that in the next podcast. So be sure to tune in to episode 7, where we talk about that clarity and we talk about flipping that script, right? So the awareness pillar is what's really hood. The clarity pillar is how do we flip that script? How do we turn that script into identifying with our God self as it applies to Megan, as it applies to Sarah, as it applies to Gabrielle, as it applies to Danielle, right? As it applies to you specifically, what does that script look like for who you are, for where you are in life, for what your goals are, for what your accomplishments are, for what your success looks like for you. So being able to really be aware of our current state is really the only way that we can start to move into the future state. And I shouldn't say the only way, right? Because we don't necessarily have to be aware. We could go all in on flipping the script, and that works for some people. But for most human beings, we like to know how things work. We want to know the who, what, why, when, and wheres, right? So it's easier for us if we can make the correlation between the current state and the current circumstances. Once that clicks in our brain, like, oh, that's why that keeps happening. That's why I'm attracting this. That's why this pattern keeps emerging, right? When we have that click, then we have some substance to understand why and how it is so important to flip that script. And it motivates us to actually implement some changes. Okay? So taking inventory and being able to notice any parts of our day that are causing us not to stick to that script. And the way that we do that is by initially just taking a look under a microscope and being sure that we understand what's really hood. You know what I'm saying? Which is the title of this podcast. What is really hood? So knowing what's really hood is super important so that we can flip that script. All right. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I am thrilled to be recording, and I'm actually going to go ahead and record the next episode now, so go ahead and take a listen. If you would love to work with me, I have some openings available now, so go ahead and check out my offerings.